may have just found an important clue connecting the Oak Island mystery to the 17th century pirate Captain William Kidd.
Somewhere on Oak Island, two words were written in ink that should not exist: Kidd's treasure. Not a rumor, not a guess, but a label set on an old map by the mapmaker himself, naming the most feared pirate who ever sailed and the exact spot he supposedly chose. If it means what it appears to mean, this is the biggest pirate discovery the island has ever surrendered. A dying man's confession, a stone buried 90 feet down, 4 mysterious keys, and a privateer's sea chest all point toward the same impossible answer, and the team has never been this close to reaching it. The ink mark.
One of the things that was kind of curious on the map is they list Kidd's treasure. It was written in pen right there. Even back then, they believed that Captain Kidd's treasure was buried on Oak Island.
At the South Shore Genealogy Center in the nearby town of Lunenburg, Charles Barkhouse and investigative journalist Randall Sullivan bend over an old map of the coast. The center is the kind of quiet archive where local history survives in ledgers, land grants, and brittle charts. The records most people never think to open. Among the inked notations on this one, 2 words stop them cold: Kidd's treasure. The label was not added by a modern hand. It was written by the mapmaker in the period of the map itself, as if the buried fortune were a settled fact worth recording alongside the coves and headlands. That single detail reframes the entire legend, because the connection between Oak Island and Captain Kidd was not invented by later treasure hunters chasing a romantic story. It was already set down in ink by someone charting this coastline generations ago. Lunenburg sits on a shore that was no stranger to pirates. The harbors and wooded islands of Nova Scotia offered exactly what a raider needed: deep water, concealment, and distance from the authorities. A mapmaker working these waters would have known the local talk, and to mark one small island as the resting place of Kidd's gold,
that was carrying gold, silver, treasure, and actually a huge quantity of sugar,
was to record something the community already took seriously. The implication is hard to overstate. Long before the mystery became famous, whoever drew this map already regarded Oak Island as a treasure site, and already regarded Captain Kidd as the man who had left something behind. For Barkhouse, who has chased the Oak Island puzzle for years, it is the rarest kind of find, a documentary trace of belief rather than rumor. Sullivan came north because the story refused to release its grip on him, drawn by the problem that frustrates every serious researcher: the gap between what the legend claims and what the record can prove. A handwritten label is not proof of treasure, but it is proof that the treasure was believed in, early and plainly. And that is more than most Oak Island leads ever offer. What the map cannot say is how the belief began. It might trace back to something real, a story carried ashore by a sailor or a settler who knew more than he should. It might be only the echo of a tale that had already grown larger than its source. The ink records the conviction. It cannot certify the cause. To weigh it, the trail has to lead back to who Kidd actually was, and to the desperate offer he made in the last days of his life. Kidd's bargain.
That's 2 million English pounds, a vast amount of money. So why didn't they just go down and get it? Well, the boys dug down.
William Kidd did not begin as a pirate. In 1696, he sailed from England aboard the Adventure Galley under a royal commission, backed by powerful lords, with orders to hunt down pirates and enemy French ships. He was, on paper, a privateer working for the crown, a respectable man trusted with a dangerous job. The voyage went wrong. Prizes were scarce. His crew grew mutinous, and in a fit of temper, Kidd struck a gunner named William Moore with a wooden bucket, a blow that killed the man. When he finally seized a rich vessel, the Quetta merchant, the politics of the moment turned against him, and the capture that might have made his name was branded an act of piracy. The privateer had become a wanted man. By the time he reached North America in 1699, Kidd understood his danger. He was arrested and held, then shipped to England to stand trial, where the verdict was effectively decided before the proceedings began. He was condemned for piracy and for the killing of his own gunner, and sentenced to death. Kidd did not go quietly to the gallows. He offered a bargain: spare his life, and he would lead the authorities to an enormous treasure he had buried somewhere east of Boston. It was no idle boast. Before his arrest, he had genuinely hidden a cache on Gardiner's Island, off the coast of New York, and the authorities had dug it up and used it as evidence against him. A man who had already buried one fortune was not. Easily dismissed when he spoke of another, the offer was refused. On May 23, 1701, William Kidd was hanged at Execution Dock in London. By the accounts that survive, the rope broke on the first attempt, and he had to be hanged a second time, and his tarred body was later left in an iron cage above the Thames as a warning to other sailors. Whatever else he had hidden went to the grave with him, yet the direction he named never stopped echoing. A line drawn east of Boston runs up the cold Atlantic coast, past the harbors of New England, toward the wooded islands of Nova Scotia, toward one small, tunneled island already marked on a chart as Kidd's treasure. The bargain failed to save him. It may have left a trail. In the centuries after his death, Kidd's name became almost synonymous with buried treasure, and hopeful searchers turned over beaches and islands from the Caribbean to New England looking for the rest of it. Most of those hunts found nothing. What set the Oak Island claim apart was that it did not rest on the legend alone. It came attached to a specific island, a specific direction, and eventually a specific sum, the kind of detail that kept the story alive long after other Kidd hunts had been quietly abandoned. Deathbed confession. The next thread surfaces not at sea but in the archives. Searching the records tied to Daniel McGinnis, one of the young men long credited with discovering the original Money Pit, Barkhouse turns up a reference to a local history book covering the Western Shore communities of the area. Tucked inside it is an account first published on the December 20th, 1863. The account did not originate in 1863. It appeared in print then, and was later repeated by a member of the Oak Island Association, the 19th century syndicate that took up the search. According to the story, more than a century before it was printed, an old man lay dying in what was then the British colony of New England. On his deathbed, the old man confessed. He said he had served in the crew of the famous Captain Kidd. He claimed that years earlier, he had helped the pirate and his men carry more than $2 million in money and bury it beneath the soil of a secluded island east of Boston. The match is the kind of detail that stops a researcher cold. A secluded island, east of Boston, more than $2 million in buried treasure. The phrasing of a 19th century account lines up almost word for word with the legend that has clung to Oak Island for generations, and with the very figure that would later be tied to the Money Pit itself. By that century, Oak Island had already consumed decades of digging and more than one company's fortune. Each new wave of searchers inherited the stories of the last, and a printed account like this one would have read less like folklore than like a clue, a reason to keep spending and digging in a place that had already swallowed so much. Caution belongs here as much as excitement. The record around Oak Island is thin, built from fragments and secondhand retellings rather than hard proof. A deathbed confession printed long after the man supposedly died is a story about testimony, not the testimony itself, and tales of dying pirates unburdening their secrets were common currency in that era. Still, the account cannot simply be set aside. It was committed to print before the modern legend had fully formed. It names a specific sum, and it describes a specific kind of place. Whether it preserves a real memory or only a well-traveled tale, it points the same way as the map, and the same way as a stone reported to have been pulled from deep inside the Money Pit. The stone. The story of the Money Pit itself begins, by the accounts long told, in 1795, when a young Daniel McGinnis noticed a circular depression in the ground on the eastern end of Oak Island. With two friends, traditionally named as John Smith and Anthony Vaughan, he began to dig, and as they descended, they found that the shaft had been deliberately filled with platforms of oak logs set at regular intervals down its length. By 1804, the search had passed to the Onslow Company, a group of investors determined to reach whatever lay at the bottom. Digging roughly 90 feet down, by the surviving accounts, they struck a large, smooth slab of stone, unlike the surrounding earth. Its surface was not blank. It carried rows of strange carvings that no one present could read. What the early diggers described went far beyond a simple hole. As later searchers pushed deeper, by the surviving accounts, the pit fought back, flooding with seawater that no amount of bailing could defeat, as though channels had been cut to let the ocean in and guard whatever lay below. True or not, the legend of a booby-trapped shaft only sharpened the central question. No one goes to the trouble of burying pocket change beneath 90 feet of earth and engineering. The stone was later studied, and the markings were translated. By the translation that has come down through the years, the inscription stated that 40 feet below it, 2 million pounds lay buried. It was the same staggering figure named in the dying sailor's confession, now seemingly set in stone at the bottom of the shaft. The translation, the story goes, came from a simple symbol substitution cipher, each carved mark standing in for a letter. If accurate, it would be among the most direct pieces of evidence the island has ever produced, a message left by whoever sealed the pit, naming the prize and its depth in plain terms. But caution is essential because the stone itself is gone. The 90-foot stone has been lost for well over a century. By the accounts that survive, it was kept, displayed for a time, even reportedly built into a fireplace and later shown in a book bindery in Halifax before it vanished from the record entirely. It cannot be re-examined, photographed, or tested today, and serious researchers have long disputed whether the translation is genuine or whether the carvings ever said any such thing at all. What remains is the pattern, laid beside the labeled map, Kidd's own claim of treasure east of Boston, and the published confession. A stone said to name 2 million pounds becomes either an extraordinary coincidence or a fragment of something real. The difference between those two possibilities is the entire mystery, and the modern search no longer rests on old paper and lost relics alone, because the proof is beginning to come out of the ground. Buried iron. On the island, Marty Lagina, Dave Blankenship, and metal detection expert Gary Drayton unearth a long, heavy piece of iron. To an untrained eye, it is an old nail. To those who know what they are holding, it is a ship spike, the kind of heavy fastener once used to bind together the timbers of a wooden vessel, and its form dates it to the early 18th century. It is not the first. Spikes like it have come from the swamp on the island, and from the spoils dug out of the area the team calls GAL-1. One after another, these heavy iron fasteners keep surfacing in different parts of the island, as if the remains of a ship, or whatever was built from one, had been scattered across the ground over the centuries. The swamp where some of the spikes were found is itself a source of suspicion. Parts of it appear, to some on the team, oddly regular for a natural feature, raising the possibility that it was shaped or even created by human hands. If that is so, then the iron coming out of it is not random debris, but the scattered evidence of deliberate work, the leftovers of people who built something here and meant for it to last. And these spikes are not small. One is so large that Blankenship jokes a nail that size would have to belong to a vessel the size of the Titanic. The joke carries a serious point underneath it. Whatever ship required iron this heavy was no small fishing boat working the coast. It was a substantial vessel, the kind that could cross open ocean carrying real cargo. To confirm the reading, the team draws on the expertise of Laird Nevin, whose involvement also reassures Canadian authorities that every artifact and culturally protected site on the island is handled properly. His verdict is firm. The spike is hand-wrought, shaped on an anvil rather than stamped out by a machine, and finished with a rose head, the faceted head a blacksmith left behind when he hammered the nail by hand. That detail matters because hand-forged rosehead spikes belong to a world before industrial nail-making, placing this one squarely in the 1700s. Drayton treats each find the same way, as a clue to be logged, dated, and compared against the others, convinced that the mystery will be solved not in a single dramatic stroke, but object by patient object. Taken together, the spikes suggest something built, a dock, a wharf, perhaps even the wreck of the great ship they came from. A wharf in particular would raise the sharpest question of all. Who went to the trouble of building a place to land a large vessel on this remote, wooded island? And what exactly were they bringing ashore, far from any harbor and any watching eyes? The cut coin. At a place on the eastern shore called Isaac's Point, Gary Drayton works the eroded bluffs alongside Peter Fernetti and Jack Begley. The island has been battered by storms, and storms reshape a coastline. When the banks wash away, anything that lay buried inside them for centuries can be left loose on the beach, which is exactly the kind of ground a metal detection expert hopes to find. A signal comes up jumpy and uncertain, the way readings get when a search coil is angled against an uneven bank, and at first it looks like it might be nothing more than surface junk. Then they dig, and it is not junk at all. It is part of a coin, and its edge has been cut, cleanly and deliberately, the angle of the cut visible on both faces. Drayton identifies it almost at once as a cut Maravedí. The Maravedí was a Spanish-made copper coin, often called one of the first coins of the New World, carried by the explorers and traders who reached the Americas through the 16 and 1700s. In an age when a coin was worth the metal inside it, a small copper piece like this was the everyday currency of the colonial Atlantic. Pirates of every nationality used them, paying out crews in mixed handfuls of foreign coin. And because exact change rarely existed, coins were commonly chopped into pieces, a whole cut into halves or quarters, to settle a debt or make an advance on a purchase. The clean cut in this maravedi is therefore not damage or decay. It is the fingerprint of how the money was actually spent, by people who divided their cash with a blade. It is not the first found here. Years earlier, the team recovered a 17th century maravedi from the Oak Island swamp. And now another has come out of the eastern bluffs. This one, protected in soil rather than soaking in salt water, survives in remarkable condition, perhaps good enough one day to reveal a date stamped into the metal. Drayton places it in the 1700s, and would not be surprised if it reached back into the 1600s. Of every surface find the team has made, the maravedis are the oldest coins recovered on the island, and the strongest evidence that someone stood on this ground in the mid to late 1600s, the very age when Kidd was prowling the seas. There is a quiet logic the searchers follow with finds like this. Spanish colonial money ran in a ladder of value, copper maravedis at the bottom, silver reals above them, gold escudos above those. The coppers are the small change a working sailor would carry and lose. If the coppers are surfacing first, the open question is what, if anything, lies higher up the ladder, still waiting in the ground. A confirmed date would change everything, because the argument would no longer rest on style and judgment, but on hard fact. A coin minted in the 1600s, lost on Oak Island, would place a human presence on this shore in precisely the window when Kidd and his contemporaries were active in these waters. It would not prove that any treasure exists, but it would prove that someone was here, early enough for the legend to be true. The privateer. The next clue comes not from the dirt, but from the archives. At the Mug and Anchor pub in nearby Mahone Bay, local historian Doug Crowell brings the team the results of a winter spent buried in old records. The work is slow and unglamorous, tracing deeds and ownership through faded handwriting, but it is the kind of patient research that can finally put a real name to a stretch of ground. Crowell had been following the chain of ownership for the Oak Island lots, asking who had held the land before Samuel Ball acquired it. Ball himself is a remarkable figure in the island's history, a formerly enslaved man who gained his freedom, settled in Nova Scotia, and built enough prosperity to buy up several Oak Island lots. But it was the owner before him on Lot 26 who caught Crowell's attention. That owner was a Captain James Anderson, and Anderson was no ordinary landholder. He was a privateer, a private sailor licensed to attack enemy shipping in wartime, a role that sat only a narrow legal line away from outright piracy. In the turbulence of the late 18th century, that line was an easy one to cross. When the American Revolution broke out, Anderson took the Patriot Oath and was given command of a ship. Then he changed sides. He defected to the British, carrying the vessel and everything aboard it across the lines, and reinvented himself as a loyalist privateer working out of the Maritimes. A man who could swear an oath to one cause and sail away serving its enemy was plainly not a man bound by ordinary rules. His end only deepened the intrigue. James Anderson died in the West Indies in 1796, soon after the discovery of the money pit on the very island where he had once held land. What a former privateer was doing in those distant waters in his final days went unrecorded, and the likeliest explanation is also the simplest: more privateering. Old habits, it seems, did not fade quietly. Crowell had saved his strongest card for last. A descendant of Captain James Anderson still lived in Nova Scotia, only a few hours away, and he had agreed to talk, to open his family's history, and to show the searchers whatever had been passed down through the generations. For a mystery so starved of hard evidence, a living link to an 18th century privateer who had owned a piece of Oak Island was almost too good to be true. A privateer turned spy was exactly the sort of man who might have found use for a quiet, defensible island with deep water close to shore. Whether Anderson ever buried anything there is unknown, and nothing in the record says that he did. But of all the names attached to the land, his is the one whose life most closely matches the shape of the legend. The Sea Chest. Alex Lagina, Peter Fornetti, and Charles Barkhouse travel with Doug Crowell roughly 50 miles north to the city of Wolfville, Nova Scotia, to the home of a man named Steve Atkinson, a descendant of Captain James Anderson. From the moment the door opens, there is a sense that this visit will be unlike the team's usual work of digging and detecting. Atkinson describes his ancestor without flinching. James Anderson was a mariner, he explains, and he was both pirate and spy. He commanded a ship called the Betsy, and records place him sailing these waters as early as 1768, some 20 years before he sold Lot 26 to Samuel Ball in 1788. A pirate and a spy, working the same coastline as Oak Island for 2 decades before the land ever changed hands. Then Atkinson brings out the object that quiets the room, Captain James Anderson's sea chest. It is the real article, the kind of thing most people only ever encounter in a story. And inside it lie documents so old and so fragile they look as though a strong breath might undo them. The papers have to be handled with the greatest care. One of them records that Anderson died in July 1796, exactly 1 year after the money pit was discovered. But another document sends a jolt through the whole group. It is a certificate, and it names Brother James Anderson a registered Master Mason in Lodge Number 9, given under the hand and seal of the lodge on June 24, 1791. The date itself fits the world of Freemasonry, the 24th of June being the Feast of St. John the Baptist, one of the order's principal festivals. And the revelation lands hard because secret societies and hidden symbols run through Oak Island theories like a thread that will not break, a privateer, a spy, a loyalist, a landowner on the island, and now a confirmed Master Mason. For a mystery built on concealed knowledge, that single word carries enormous weight. Then there are the keys. Anderson is shown holding a set of 4 keys, and one of them opens the sea chest itself. Atkinson wonders aloud what the other 3 were meant to open, and whether more chests like this one once existed somewhere on the island. The narration carries the question one step further, carefully, and without claiming any bloodline between the 2 families. Daniel McGinnis and his 2 companions were reported to have found 3 treasure chests while digging the original money pit. Whether Anderson's spare keys have anything to do with those reported chests is entirely unproven, a connection no document confirms. But once the question is raised, it is impossible to set back down. The stack. None of it may connect. Each piece taken alone has an innocent explanation, and the historical record is too thin to force them into a single story. But laid side by side, the clues now stand in one striking column, a chart labeled Kidd's Treasure in the mapmaker's own hand, a dying sailor's, confession of 2 million buried on an island east of Boston, a lost stone said to name the same sum at the bottom of the money pit, ship spikes from a vessel far too large for these shores, cut Spanish coins from the age of Kidd, a privateer, spy, and Master Mason who owned the land and carried 4 mysterious keys, and a long-told story of 3 chests pulled from the pit. Taken together, they may mark the biggest pirate discovery Oak Island has ever offered, or the most elaborate coincidence in the island's long history of them. If the hunt for that answer is worth following, subscribe to the channel so the next dig reaches you the moment it drops. Then settle one debate in the comments. Of every clue here, the map that names Kidd, the stone that names the sum, the cut Spanish coins, or Captain Anderson's 4 keys, which one convinces you the most? And what do you believe those other 3 keys were truly made to open?